Can you sort of articulate your strategy of how you've approached things?
Our strategy is to build an ecosystem whereby we can plug and play other solutions. So what we're doing is looking for best in class. I think the strategy needs to be first to understand where you are in the market, what you're capable of, where the others are in the market, and I'm sitting next to one of the others right here, and understanding that you can't compete with them toe to toe in terms of scale or in terms of investment. So necessity being the mother of invention, you look to other solutions to deliver that. And so we see our size, relatively speaking, it's quite a steep hockey stick when you get to the Savills, CB, Jones Lang end of the market, being agility and speed to market in terms of the decision-making process, a relatively flat structure, and the ability to make those decisions and take them forward. And of course, SaaS, software as a service, enables the ability for us to do that quite quickly once you put the ecosystem in place to do that. So it's about, we're a completely cloud-based business now, have been for a few years, and that gives us real flexibility with just selecting best-in-class solutions from partners and other providers to deliver those services to clients and to occupiers. That's the high level.
Okay, and can you give us some examples of the sorts of things that you've been doing in terms of data or automation, any of the things you have plugged in and played with?
Sure. Well, where do I start? We use RPA, which was mentioned earlier, throughout the business.
For those that don't know, RPA?
Sorry, robotic process automation, which is just a fancy name for software that takes data from one place or takes a routine and automates that and puts it somewhere else. So what that does is give us real scalability if we were to take on a portfolio or lose a portfolio of properties. We don't have to deal with the talent finding, the acquisition that you normally do, and actually it releases people to focus on the value add tasks and not the simple rekeying of data around the business. There's Locale as our default occupier portal, and there's been a lot of references again to occupier portals and engaging with occupiers or customers. And so we're rolling that across the entire portfolio of managed estate, which is about 800 buildings, as a kind of a process that we're running through at the moment, and we're well down that channel. And conversely, for our clients, which I guess is the other side of that service delivery we need to undertake, we're using Coyote as a tool to deliver live real-time data to our clients.
And Jules, when we hear about sort of plug and play and being able to adapt and not just have one system that's in there, how will investors view buildings that maybe there's something they haven't heard of that is part of the M&E, or there's a system in the sort of, the backbone of the building? If it's going to be sold for tens of millions of pounds, do they need reassurance that this thing is robust and reliable? How does that sort of play out?
I guess we don't know yet, is the quickest answer to that, and the slightly less quick answer is that my expectation would be that yes, investors are going to want reassurance that it's going to work, obviously, in the same way as they want reassurance about every other aspect when they do their due diligence. To the extent that it adds value, again, we haven't, I don't think we've seen that yet, not least because British Land hasn't started selling any of the, any really smart buildings, because they're, with the exception of the Edge there's the one that everyone throws out each time. I was hoping we'd get through a conference without WeWork and the Edge, but you failed me on that one. These buildings don't really exist yet, so we haven't seen whether there's value in them. But it seems to me that it stands to reason that there will be value in having these buildings, because they will run more efficiently, and therefore people will want to pay more to rent them, and therefore they will be more valuable. What happens to the data in that transaction is a question that I think we need to resolve as an industry. There will be a lot of legacy data in a building that you sell. It will have all its operational, there will be an operational database that goes with it. Does that transfer to the new owners? Does it stay with the old owners? Does it stay in a third shared space? And I suspect we'll work that through bit by bit over the next decade or so. I suspect it'll take that long.
And how important, with all this data, it seems like there's almost going to be too much for clients, occupiers, whether it's in retail, shopping centre owners or occupiers, if you're trying to talk to them about their office space. Just be this, constant waves of data coming forward. How do you translate that into meaningful information to them? You've talked about dashboards. Is visualization important? Is there a human aspect to that?
Yeah, visualization is clearly important. I mean, we're already through and beyond a world where we have more data than we possibly know what to do with right now. I kind of feel we're in a stage where we've got a whole load of data and a load of humans that aren't capable of dealing with the quantum of data we have, and that we will move to a world when we have decent levels of AI that can actually do something useful with it. But for the moment, I think the task is for us humans is being able to work out what is actually useful of what we've got. And there'll be a lot of other data out there that we maybe is useful in the future and therefore probably is worth storing for now, but what is actually useful now? So to think of the sensors that I talked about, we're gathering a whole load of data constantly. Every second they're gathering data about how many people are in the space they're looking at and what the temperature is and the air quality, et cetera, et cetera. And at the moment, we're not using very much of that at all. So but what we're trying to do is filter down to what do we actually need to know, and that is, for example, how much of the time is that meeting room completely empty, and when it isn't completely empty, what's the average number of people in it? And that already is a super powerful bit of information that we can do something with. But we've got more data already than we know what to do with.
I'd second that. I think the only people that really want data are the people that sell cloud storage and perhaps data scientists. And outside of that, people want answers to problems that they're trying to solve. And I think that's where dashboards come in is creating visibility of effectively the things that they want to take accountability for. I think in the new world, and I apologise for bringing Edge into it. We've created a world where we're moving away from here's a building with 5 boxes we need to rent out, and what goes on in the middle of those we're not necessarily worried about, to creating environments where you have short-term, long-term, flexi, co-living, working, and actually understanding the utilisation of that space becomes a lot more important. But you can be specific about the data that you require in that. How much space is being used? What temperature do people like? What lighting settings do they like? And I think if we're quite targeted about the data we want, then data's not so much of an issue anymore.
And are clients asking for this, or is the sort of driving motivation coming from internally?
They're curious about it. It depends on which clients. I mean, we have a whole variety of different discussions with different people. We would encourage these discussions, but I think bringing it back to hard economics, if you can get, and this was the trick with the Edge, 2,500 people into a building designed for 1,500, and you're going to get effectively 2,500 paying people in a building that would normally only be paid for 1,500 people, then the economics are quite strong in favour of those models that support that. And I guess that's kind of where you guys are seeing success is in that. So yeah, I think there are people that are curious and that are asking those questions, but no one's asking me to turn up with a hard drive full of lots of data.
Mm. And Ritu, from your experience of dealing with real estate, dealing with landlords and building owners and managers, what would you say are some of the skills or the ways of thinking, the mindsets of how they need to approach new models such as yours?
That's a really good question. I think, first of all, I think we are at the end of the day, we are humans and we are creature of our own biases and what we live like, right? So I think a lot of times when you talk to people in the real estate world, I think, if you haven't experienced living somewhere else, or if you haven't felt a pain point yourself, then I think it's really hard to grasp that somebody else could be feeling that, right? I think, John, you mentioned the empathize side of things, right? And I think that's where that would be really great, is to see a little bit more openness around how do you create empathy for the different struggles that people might be going through, and as a landlord, how do you answer for those struggles, right? And so I think, as we talk to real estate companies and landlords, it does take, in the beginning when we first started, it took a lot of education to really say that this is all completely service. It's not a hippie collective, and nor is it a dorm for kids. And don't worry, there won't be any late parties and things like that. But I think over time, as we have grown our brand and as we have success stories from our real estate partners that we are already working with, and as they see the members that are living at LifeX, I think it has made them a lot more open to working with us. So in terms of transparency, for example, we actually have systems in place that we can share with our landlords and real estate companies the members that are living at LifeX at any given time. So then they can see what type of profiles of people are we attracting. So they feel like they have the transparency and visibility into our system to feel that they are, that it's a assured and assured partnership for them.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. If we see what questions we've got on Slido, if we bring that up. Hopefully you've been busy, or a couple of you have. Let's have a look. Julian, question about metrics there. And maybe this is something that other people would answer as well. We've heard people allude to things like getting under the skin of occupiers, being close, feedback from customers, things like this, part of design thinking. Any thoughts around that and metrics?
Yeah. So just to begin with, I would exactly echo what you just said there. I think we as landlords have got to get much better at understanding what our occupiers and our customers, the users of space, actually want. And my flippant comment about real estate developers historically just building a building, renting it out, and then going skiing for 20 years is kind of how the industry was. And we need to move away from that. And this kind of stuff is part of it. That said, measuring productivity is, I think, the holy grail. And if anyone in the audience reckons they've cracked this, come and talk to me, because I'd love to be able to do that. There are lots of ways you can do it, and none of them I think really solve it. The ways that we are exploring generally point at other things that you believe are correlated. So things like air quality, there is evidence that suggests that when the air quality is better, the cognitive ability of people in the space is better, and therefore you'd assume that their productivity is better. But actually, if those people are working on the wrong thing, their productivity isn't better. They're just working really well at the wrong thing. So we've got to work out how productivity works. We've explored things like the Leesman Index, and there are other people out there that are trying to solve this. But my view is no one has cracked productivity or really, I think, come close. So as I said, if someone out there knows differently, please come and talk to me. On the well-being side, I think that is quite a lot easier, if nothing else, because well-being can be subjectively measured a lot better. You can ask people how their well-being is today versus yesterday, and who knows better than you what your well-being is. So that one is a lot easier. You can measure air quality, you can measure light levels, and you can ask people how they're feeling, and that's a lot easier. But productivity is really difficult.
I talking to people is a really good one. Asking people. I mean, I'd be interested to know one of the things today. How many people in the room, maybe a show of hands, knowing how noisy and the idea of spinning rotor blades, actually want a drone landing on the roof of their house?
One on stage, I think.
But that's where we start, right? It's just. And I do this with everyone that I meet in my own company, and then people I meet from other companies as well. Is just talk about this stuff, ask them. We are all users of space. We all have a good understanding of what we want, but we can't make assumptions. And it's not easy. There is no perfect metrics in understanding how people like space. And again, that is one of the problems that we discuss and try and crack with new technology every day. Occupier portals obviously help with that because it creates that communication platform to be able to ask people and talk to people more often. But yeah, there's no perfect data science in that as far as I'm aware.
We work with the Centric Lab, which is a neuroscience business. I don't know, some people here will know of. And if someone told me that 3 years ago or 4 years ago even I was going to be working with a neuroscience business, I would probably have looked at them sideways, and so would a lot of other people. The reality is now that we're trying to understand how places do shape people's well-being and productivity. And productivity is one of those things that's notoriously difficult to measure. So what can we do as managing agents or as owners or investors is try and articulate the best possible space. And people need different types of space. So that's why we're seeing a lot of variety and a lot of mixed use schemes and a lot of variety even within the buildings in terms of the types of spaces in those places, because everyone needs something slightly different from their workplace. And people are coming to, for those who attended the Future of Work event yesterday, but people who are coming to spaces, they're doing different things now than they were doing 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We don't have people sitting in rows of desks, by and large, rekeying data into Excel spreadsheets from one to another. They're doing a lot more creative thought, a lot more creative thinking, problem solving, and that takes a different type of environment to achieve.
Yeah. And in terms of internal communication and feedback, you talked about a platform. Let everybody know what the groundbreaking platform is that has unlocked so much at Savills.
It's Facebook. You know, why break the mold? They created something called Workplace. We had pretty much 90% adoption within months in our management start. It was incredible. We looked at lots of different options, and we kept saying, "I wish it was a bit more like Facebook." So, when they announced Workplace, it was a nice fit. I talk about it a lot. The reason I haven't mentioned it is I'm not on any commission from them, so I kind of, it's good. Can recommend it.
I think it shows that there are things that are familiar and household names that maybe it doesn't need to be, a commissioned 2-year software build. If somebody's already built a simple internal social media platform, then that's all it takes sometimes. What would be your advice along the panel for internal sort of change management and getting ideas through organisations and having that two-way discourse that can help real estate to modernise?
So I guess, I can jump in here for a little bit. We use something called Slack internally in our company. And it was funny when you mentioned that on the stage, I thought, doesn't everybody do this, where they communicate? So I guess it's not something that happens that often in the real estate world. But I guess for us, we are a very open organization. Of course, we are still quite young. We have 30 employees, but one of the things we actually do to understand how our members are is that we encourage our employees to become members at LifeX. So we have quite a few of our employees that have been through similar experiences, and then they get a discounted rate to live at LifeX, and they get to talk to other members, understand their problems, use our products, be able to live there, and then recommend different ideas and changes and new services that we can offer, basically. So I think if you give your employees platforms to engage with your customers, if you give them platform to be able to share their ideas openly without being judged, then you'll see quite a few people doing that.
Potentially easier for us as a smaller business, albeit not your scale, but slightly larger, about 300 people. We use a solution called Beekeeper, but the principle is exactly the same as Slack or Facebook or any of these other solutions in terms of instant communication and the always online approach to life. For me, it's about culture, not about the technology. Real estate isn't about buildings any more than technology is about software. It's about people, and that's where your focus is, right? If your focus is on the building or on the technology, you're kind of missing where you're developing it. And we've all spoken to people who know that there's a lot of software solutions out there looking for a problem to solve. You need to approach it from the other end, don't you? You need to find out what do the people want. And so our approach is very much recruit the type of people that you like or you think will deliver what you need the business to deliver. And in some areas that's people, because they're front of house or they're meeting clients and they're articulating those problems. And other areas it's the data type people who will really crunch those numbers or sit behind the technology and help serve that platform. But culturally, it's about do they fit in this size and type of business? And then the communication comes from that.
Yeah. And Jules, in terms of the sort of internal organisation at British Land, how does that work and it sort of get off your desk and onto everyone else's desks?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that you can do quite a lot with technology, but nothing will happen unless you have the culture around innovation and change. And look, it's difficult in a big company to create a culture around innovation and change, and it's really difficult in a big company that works in an industry that fundamentally hasn't really changed in 100 years to create a culture of innovation and change. But what we've done is we've tried to create roles and teams like mine that sit away from the day-to-day. So I report in through the kind of strategy and investment team, which was deliberately created to think about how to do stuff differently. And that frees me up from the day-to-day, so I don't have to worry about day-to-day P&L and performance of buildings. I can think about, irritating, disruptive thoughts instead. Obviously, the flip side of that is, although that means that there's a group of people at British Land who are on a daily basis thinking about how to do things differently and how the industry is changing and what we need to do about that. There is the other part of the business that is happily carrying on with their day job and would rather not be upset by that, thank you very much. So, if I was sitting there, if people like me were sitting there in the business, maybe I could affect more change, but actually I wouldn't have as much time to get energetic about stuff. So I don't have an answer. It's really difficult, is frankly, and you've just got to keep trying, and you've got to keep changing things. And my former life as a management consultant, one of the things we observed is that kind of any structure you put in place, any reporting structure, any performance management structure, any organization structure you put in place, it will work for a bit, and then it kind of needs to be changed. We live in a world of constant change, so I think you need to kind of try things and experiment, and then accept that you're always going to have to move on.
Absolutely. Please put a hand up if you want to ask a question from the floor. Can we see what else we've got on Slido to put to the panel? We've got the skills shortage hasn't really come up. We've sort of touched around the edges of it.
Starting on that one, and that's a huge issue, particularly for smaller players in the market, if I'm honest, because no longer are we competing against other real estate firms for that talent, if you like, if you want to use that word, whether it's surveying or FM or account staff. On technology, if you're employed in that space particularly, we're competing against everyone. That's the reality of it. And most people have got deeper pockets than us, and potentially more exciting locations or offices or campuses or whatever it is. So that's a real issue for us going forward in terms of making sure that we can capture the right people. And it's about articulating what you feel is different about your business that might attract them. What are the other advantages, whether it's much more flexible working or much more ownership of problems or just a culture you can present them with. But it's an interesting one, and we're working on it.
I'd like to think that people that have just come out of their bedrooms learning their development and technology skills and just stripping apart their Raspberry Pis have got a desperate interest in advancing the agenda of property in the office space. But the reality is that they want to work at Facebook, or they want to work at Google, or they want to work at Amazon, and we're equally competing in the same environment. So trying to make that an attractive proposition is interesting.
And how have you responded to that?
That's a good question. I guess phrasing the bigger problems, making the problems more appealing. I think people in with a mindset of wanting to solve problems, when you phrase the opportunities that they are. Look at the retail space. There's a whole area of our sphere that is so exciting with opportunities. There are so many challenges that could potentially be solved, using variations of traditional means, technologies. And I think, you phrase those problems and you make people realize the opportunity there, then you can attract those people in. But I think a lot of it we see through suppliers.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's about partnerships again. Well, certainly for us, it's about if we can't get those people because they're working for startups, then let's work with them, let's partner with them to deliver what we need. And that's absolutely viable.
Yeah. And Ritu, you've had some success in hiring from real estate as well.
Yes, we have actually. We have a few employees right here. Carla, Luke, and Chris, thank you for joining us here. But we're super excited to have that. And I think it's because, I think we are seeing that in the real estate world, like people like John and others, you guys here are seeing that something needs to be not necessarily changed, but evolved, right? I don't want to call it change. It just needs to evolve. And I think for us, it's been about creating a mission and a culture where it excites people to join in and create the change or the evolvement together. So so we're seeing quite a few people from the real estate industry join us. But I also was going to say that I think part of attracting talent is the giving them the great goals and things like that, but also making them feel like you take care of them. So we actually have a lot of companies that we work with that tell their employees and new hires that we have LifeX as a partner. So you don't have to worry about where you're going to live. You can just come in and live at LifeX, right? So I think it makes it a lot more easier as an employer to also attract talent when you can tell them that you have figured some of those things out for them as well, because housing becomes one of the biggest challenges for employees.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there was a question sort of complementing that about how have you built your team? You're 30 strong after 2 years, so it's quite some hiring spree as well as opening in cities. And and it also touches on diversity as well, and starting with education. Can you talk a bit about your story of how you built your team?
Actually, it's funny. We have 30 employees representing, I think, 16 plus nationalities. Quite a few people actually have dual nationalities as well, and over 50% women. So we are quite excited about that as statistics. So I think for us, both Sune comes from more industrial design experience. I come from more product experience. And for us, it was really bringing the best minds together to solve these challenges. We knew that we couldn't do it alone, so we tried to bring people in that were very curious, had felt the pain point themselves, so could relate to it. And then third, had the tenacity to learn quickly and iterate. So one of our biggest values at LifeX is just doing it. So that means like even if you don't know something, you can learn about it and try it, and it's okay to fail, right? So I think one of you guys had talked about that you want to encourage failure in a company, and it's okay to fail. And I think that's how we've been able to create.
Maybe allow.
We're enough there, because in property management, if you fail, then that's so someone gets hurt. That's not good.
Yeah, there's a level of failures, but I guess what I mean is that you should create a framework that people feel comfortable to take some risks. Absolutely. I guess that's probably the better way to say it. So I think that's how we have created a culture of diversity and inclusion within LifeX itself, and we have very strong value systems that we use to even in our recruiting process, etc., to make sure that we are hiring the right people that will fit that culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And big question on retrofitting. We talked a lot about new buildings. One of the sort of many big, the holy grail is how do we retrofit a lot of, especially on the carbon side, into old buildings.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? So our policy on this is that every time we get our hands on a building, by which I mean we're building a new building or we've got vacant possession and we're remediating it before leasing it back out, we will be retrofitting with all of the sort of stuff that I was talking about earlier. The bit that's tricky is that a lot of our leases have still got more than a decade to run, and so what are we going to do with that space? And we are experimenting on ourselves to begin with. So in our own headquarters, which is we're discovering has got lighting systems that are 15 plus years old and HVAC systems that aren't much younger than that, we're working out how we can, with low impact on people's day-to-day work, go in and put the kind of modules on them that will enable us to extract the data from them, control them remotely, understand what's happening, and therefore optimize our usage of them. But I can't really tell you what, therefore, we're going to do until we've worked through those trials and worked out how to do it without negatively impacting the day-to-day of our occupiers. But you're right, from a carbon perspective, all the legacy buildings that are all over London are the ones that we're going to need to crack, because it's obviously hugely counterproductive if we think we're going to solve climate change problems by ripping down every building in the world and rebuilding nice, shiny, better ones. That's just not going to work. We've got to fix what we're doing today first.
Yeah. I echo the challenges on the retrofit. It's often completely, not economically viable to put something in. I guess also the kind of disintermediated structure that we have within property, especially in the management space. We're often, we're spending tenants' money. The positions might be short, they might be long, but actually looking at the ROI over a period of time and who's going to pay for that and where the benefit's going to come from, it's really difficult to model that to work. Always use the example of LED lighting, which you'd put it into a new building, but most of the older buildings you walk into still don't have it. It kind of seems nonsensical. The frustration is when we get new buildings that still have this, we'll still have 5 different Ethernet networks in, as opposed to 1, or that don't have connected systems, and that's where the frustration comes in. We feed a lot into our design for management and design teams to make sure that when we do get buildings, they are equipped with the technology that we need. But that still doesn't seem to be happening uniformly across the industry.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we'll be back here next year reporting on the progress that's been made, and somebody will have cracked it. Ever the optimists. Please join me in thanking our panellists for a brilliant debate there.